Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our annual survey launch. God, these things come around very quickly, don't they? Doesn't seem 2 minutes ago that we were doing the 2023 survey launch. We've had a good look coverage in the press today, if you've spotted it. So the Today programme ran a piece with Arup talking about the survey results and giving the employer perspective of those, pretty much focused on the number of applications students are making. We're going to get back to that as we go through the presentation. We had the Sunday Times run a piece on the salaries data that's in the survey. We're going to cover that as well. And there's been a whole bunch of other bits of press that I won't bore you with going through an endless list. But this is your chance really as ISE members to get your insights into the survey. I'm very quickly going to hand over to Georgia, who's going to go through the detail of that. Georgia's the brains behind this survey. Her and the team at Derby, they put all the time and effort into this. So I do want to say up front, thank you to all of those that did participate in the survey. This is the largest survey of its kind in the UK. But without all those members taking the time to give us their information, obviously we wouldn't have a survey to produce. And the data in this underpins a lot of the work we do and a lot of the work that sort of happens following on from this in terms of issues that we want to look at, want to address as an industry. I'm sure most of you are used to ISE webinars, so you kind of know the drill by now. Please feel free to use the chat function. It's good to have a lot of conversation going, people comparing notes, thoughts, questions, etc. If you want to ask questions, we do have time for questions at the end. This data always produces lots of questions. Please do use the Q&A box because I'll keep an eye on those. So the chat can sometimes be a little bit difficult to keep track of, but I'll make sure to look at the Q&A. So you've got a question for Georgia at the end, pop it into the Q&A, and I'll come back online and present those to Georgia. So without further ado, I think we should get into the meat of this webinar. Georgia, can I hand over to you to kind of talk us through your key findings from the survey?
Yes, you can. I have some technical issues, so bear with me, everyone. And if I disappear, I do apologise. I will be back. So I'm just going to start bringing up the presentation slides.
Maybe if you want me to waffle, Georgia, while you do that. I'll waffle. Okay. If you want me to do the slides, send me just on an email and I'll pop them up and I can dry them for you if you need. Oh, here we go. Georgia has the slides. Well, I was going to start waffling then and detracting from Georgia's content, but I'll hand straight back to you, George. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the time, Phil, though. Sorry about that, everyone. So hello. Really great to be here today and take you through our findings. To start with a little bit about the survey itself, this survey was undertaken during the month of July, and we had around about 145 employers respond to us, which reflected over 40,000 student hires that you guys were undertaking in the last 12 months. And we've just shown here in terms of the balance of sectors that responded to our survey this year, which is very much in line with our demographics of our members. So really great to see that this is pretty representational in terms of the insights that we get. Also to mention that we will be coming and doing sector forums and doing deeper dives onto the sector level in November. So please do attend that if you'd like to understand a bit more about what this means for your sector specifically. So let's start with the macro picture. Let's start and look at what the student labour market has been doing in this last 12-month period. A quick reminder, the majority of our employers are predominantly focused on graduate recruitment. Many of them also do school level activities, including school and college leaver recruitment, work experiences, and I should mention T-levels wasn't 0%, it was just -1%. So it looks a bit funny on our graph, but there were some people supporting the T-level placement initiatives who have given us information that we've included in the wider report. So what is the labour market doing in terms of recruitment activities for students? As you can see over the years, and this is a chart that takes us from 2025 all the way through to where we are today and projecting into the 2024-25 campaign year. And I think the headline here really is that things are cooling in terms of the number of vacancies that were recruited in the last 12 months and are projected to be recruited in the coming 12. There is some shoots of hope around school and college leavers, but for graduates and interns and placement students, definitely a continual cooling with regards to the volumes of applications you're looking at, the volumes of recruitment you're looking to do. So let's take a quick look at the school and college leaver market. As you can see here, positive growth by most sectors. To call out the digital and IT sector purely because this trend of their decreasing of recruitment volumes is actually not just about early careers. This is actually seen in all parts of the sector in terms of recruitment for professionals as well as early careers individuals. So we do talk a bit more about that in the report, but just to note today that as a sector, you'll continually see that maybe this isn't as growth as other sectors, but that isn't just for early careers. What is interesting, though, in the early careers space is that regardless of sector, we are hearing that digital, IT, and AI skills or roles and occupations are one of the top places that people are looking to recruit early careers talent into. So for a second year running, regardless of sector, the places where you are looking to recruit students into is IT, AI, and digital skills, accountancy, finance and banking, and engineering. And that has been pretty consistent for the last couple of years, but really much stronger in terms of the proportion for these three skill sets in the last year's report. So how else are you looking to develop skills? Well, you're also looking to bring in apprentices and help apprentices develop skills through undertaking different levels of programs. Again, the number of employers who responded this year regarding recruiting apprentices in the last 12 months was up to 82% of our employers told us that they were recruiting some form of apprenticeship within their recruitment activities, which is brilliant and a fair increase from last year as well. So a really interesting trend that we just keep seeing growing year on year in terms of the use of apprenticeships. There is a lot of discussion, obviously, around what is to come around apprenticeships under the new government's initiatives, which we are all hearing more about in the weeks and months to come. And this will be particularly relevant when we look next year in terms of the demographics and split of what types and what levels of apprenticeships are being deployed to skill these individuals, particularly around the higher levels, such as degree and master's level, which, as you can see here towards the bottom of the slide, are being utilised in pretty much all types of individuals. But obviously, there's a lot of talk at the moment about the level 7 funding, particularly, which could influence where we see these demographics maybe evolve towards different levels in the future. So let's talk about experiences of work, another great way that people can and do gain the skills that they need to go on to make good career choices and to join the world of work. The left-hand chart here is all about the internship and placement student marketplace, which has, as you can see, again, ebbed and flowed across the last 10 years and is set to decline quite significantly in the coming 12 months. However, it's not all bad news. As you can see on the right-hand side here, actually the investment in work experiences for school and college leavers is actually being a bigger focus than previous years. And now nearly half of the employers that responded to our survey told us they were offering some form of work experience to school and college leaver age groups. What's interesting about the story for the internships and placement students is that we know from our development survey that they go on to arrive more career ready and that they also go on to stay for longer in the organisation than a new hired graduate. And we see in our report this year that the conversion rates of former interns and former placement students into those graduate hires this year has again leapt up. Nearly 54% of former interns and 49% of former placement students having those conversions into graduate hires. And I'm sure below the surface of these details, there's a lot of discussion to be had, different organisations taking different approaches to how they look at converting placement and interns into graduate positions. But this is just a very interesting trend, which we, again, expect to continue. But interestingly, that dip in recruitment activities of these types of students could lead to a challenge in being able to secure a proportion of your graduate talent through these pipelines. So let's now look at EDI, another big topic for employers, very much across the board, part of business strategies, not just recruitment strategies. But it's definitely become an area for recruitment strategies over the last 5 to 10 years, where we've seen a more targeted approach. And as we can see in the report this year, a high proportion of our employers have at least one diversity target within their recruitment activities. Typically, the most popular areas to be targeted is gender and ethnicity. But as you can see here, there are many other characteristics that are also being targeted in terms of recruitment. What is interesting, and you can see this more in our report and at the EDI conference that we're hosting next month, is that actually, while there are targets, very few employers are finding it easy to meet them, or indeed are missing them on a regular basis, even though they are undertaking targeted activities to try and achieve those goals. We also know there is a persistent challenge with data, which is probably creating some opaqueness about the level of success within these types of activities and within the target metrics as well. So let's take a look from a geographical perspective. Another diversity is within where people locate their early careers talent. You can see here we're looking at the graduate labour market, but in our report and in the wider data, you will see that we look at this for all different types of hires, but the trends are very similar, which is why we look at the graduate marketplace today. The dominant number of recruits are being placed in London. However, you can see that there are different proportions of hiring happening across the UK. And on the left here, we asked our employers this year, why? What's driving your strategy when it comes to thinking about the location that you want to bring your graduates into? And it was a very interesting and relatively mixed picture, because you have the dominant strategy coming from a business direction in terms of diversifying the locations of that talent, when actually there is still a high dominance in London. Other factors, which I think we will probably all resonate with, are things like salary, visas, and the fact that business strategies sometimes wish to hub and centralize talent within certain locations, particularly in the early careers space, when having that common community with the right support and setup can be very important in terms of where you locate your early careers talent. And to talk a bit now about visas, and then we'll come on to talk about salaries. As you all know, we often talk about and ask about international students. And to bear in mind when we think about the context of this year's report, the data I'm sharing with you today is drawn from that 12-month campaign where we were just finding out what the government's changes in immigration laws and regulations was going to be. So what we present today is maybe a precursor to the direction of travel that we may see starting to manifest in this current recruitment campaign year, as the understanding of the implications of the changes to immigration and visas start to really be understood by employers who do recruit actively for international students. So here we've asked about the type of visa that we see employers hiring their graduates onto. And interestingly, while this balance between the graduate and the skilled worker visa has become more balanced within the last 12 months, it hasn't changed as dramatically as you might expect, given the challenges with the skilled worker visa, salary implications for that sponsorship, and the alternative challenges with the limitations with the graduate visa. So we wanted to unpick this a little bit more and understand a bit more about what was happening for our employers. And we asked them about what the impact of these visa changes were. Again, 44% were saying they weren't making any changes. This could be the timing of when the report was undertaken comparatively to when the immigration changes were coming into place. But you can see that it was already having a fairly significant effect for a number of our employers. So 30%, nearly a third, had to decrease the number of international students they could hire because of the changes in the visas. 18% were rescinding existing offers, which of course is not a position any employer ever wants to be in. And in other ways, trying to factor in the changes to retaining those existing offers. There were people, so 11% of employers, looking to move candidates to a different location in the UK to try to balance the requirements as they would be when they joined this autumn or beyond. And you can see here that 14% were going to be reviewing what they did in terms of implications for visas for their incoming international students. So again, I think we'll see much more of this solidifying in our next report and within the next 12 months of recruitment activities. Starting salaries, Stephen mentioned at the beginning, we've had some very interesting press coverage on this one, and it's always a hot topic with our employers and other members within the networks. So it would be amiss for us not to spend some time on this today. This picture here explains, firstly, what the typical salary in 2024 was by the different types of students. So graduates, £32,000, interns, 24,159, school and college leavers, 23,000, and placement students, 24,000. But what the bubbles in the blue and the green tell us is, first, in the blue, how has that changed percentage-wise from last year? And then in the green, how much has that changed since last year when you apply the Consumer Price Index, which is the way we look at the impact of inflation on the salaries that these students are receiving. As you can see, and we're going to go into a bit more detail on this in a second, there is positive growth year on year. However, that growth is minimized by the impact of inflation, which, as we all know, has been a particular challenge in the UK over the last 12 to 24 months. So let's look at this in a bit more detail in terms of what the time implications of our salary information tell us. And what we can see in this slide is about the starting salaries over time, not adjusted for inflation. And you can see that most types of hires have seen fairly strong growth year on year across the last 10 years. But again, when you apply the index to look at this from an inflation perspective, you can see that actually, particularly for the graduate salaries, the real take-home pay, if you like, that they're seeing, the money they're seeing in their pocket at the end of each month is actually decreasing and is actually now stagnated. So this, of course, we know leads to challenges, both for retention, and we saw that in our development survey, but also in terms of attracting students to your opportunities, particularly if you're unable to offer salaries that are in line with your market peers. Now, this is a headline that is making the news today, as Stephen said. We asked about the volumes of applications, and then we looked at that compared to the number of vacancies each employer had. And for the graduates alone, you told us that you had received around 1.2 million applications in the last 12 months for circa 17,000 vacancies. 1.2 million applications is pretty mind-blowing, but it's actually not the highest number of applications we've heard you tell us about. In 2021-22 cycle, there was actually 1.3 million applications. But what makes this so headline-grabbing is that the actual number of vacancies has not proportionally raised to the number of applications. So what you find is that the ratio between applications and number of vacancies is the highest we have ever seen it at the ISE. So for every 140 graduate applications, there is one vacancy at the end of that, which is creating huge challenges for employers as well as for the candidates. So I'm going to touch upon the candidate side of things first, and then we're going to go in and look at this from the employer side in more detail. Here you can see we asked our employers about what were they seeing in terms of trends by candidates in terms of ghosting, declining, reneging, withdrawing from the process. And while this is relatively similar to last year, small proportional variances in some of these data points, what I think is important to remember is that while this is talking about percentages, the physical number of candidates, as we've just seen, is exponentially higher than the year before. So in physical numbers, this is a lot more candidates dropping out of the process, reneging offers, declining offers. And this is a trend that we think is probably going to continue to grow in the next campaign year, so in the next 12 months. So let's dive a little bit into the detail of how you're recruiting and what challenges you're facing and what successes you're making within that. You may remember each year we ask about the team sizes, the budgets you have, and we use that information to look at things like what the cost per hire looks like and how budgets are being split. Two quite interesting things from the data this year. The first one is the proportion of employers using some form of RPO or outsourced recruitment support has significantly increased. This year, nearly 50%, 49% of employers are using some form of provision, which is more than last year, and possibly to do with that increasing in volumes of applications, because when we asked where do you typically use these types of support, it tends to be at that very beginning of the process to manage the volumes of applications with screening and processing of applications. Again, thinking about the huge jump in application numbers, it's interesting on the left-hand side to see that still the majority of budgets is being spent on attraction and marketing activities. And we're going to look at that again in a moment, but just really the other headline to talk about here is cost per hire, which of course is calculated between the budgets and the volume of recruits that you're making each year. but to a certain degree cannot control or does not have calculated in it the volume of applications. So again, the overall sentiment we're taking from these data points is that recruiters are being asked to do more with less. So let's take a look at attraction and marketing. Another trend that's a little bit different to last year is that the in-person and hybrid balance are probably making themselves more clear today than they were in the last couple of years. And we're really seeing that more activity, more investment in-person activities. The bubbles here again, the darker bubbles are about the levels of engagement. So how many employers rated this as the highest level of engagement with students. And then in the lighter pink bubble, this is about how employers rated the type of engagement in terms of the highest quality of applications it delivered. Last year, you may remember that in-person was absolutely the top for engagement and for quality of applications. But this year, we're actually starting to see that employers feel that maybe the hybrid approach, where they're doing in-person as well as virtual activities, is leading to the highest quality in applications. But it is very closely followed by the in-person levels of activities. And again, no surprise to anyone who's actively engaged in assessment and selection that the picture of how you assess and select your students is getting more and more complex. What this chart shows, and it's a bit of a heat map, is not just the type of assessment that you might be undertaking, but how it was rated in terms of effectiveness, how much it was used in the last campaign year, and then at what stages in the process. And again, I'm going to come on to talk about AI because it's absolutely remiss if we didn't in today's report. It's again possibly unsurprising that interviews are really at the top in terms of being utilised by recruiters for assessment and selection, but also being deemed most effective. So let's talk about AI. So we asked a lot of questions in this year's report about AI, so some of which we don't have previous year data points on, but the sentiment is really interesting and is definitely still an evolving picture. So we asked about the candidates' use of AI. We have a hypothesis that this jump in applications is probably linked to the availability and use of AI by candidates. What do employers think of that was our main question. And actually, it's a really mixed picture, as you can see here. 43% of employers told us they didn't have a problem with candidates using AI in the recruitment process. And when we delved a little bit deeper on that, we found that the places they thought it was most appropriate to use AI was actually, again, in that leveling the playing field, enabling candidates to improve their CV or their application questions. They were less sure about how applicable using AI in the latter stages of the recruitment cycle were deemed relevant. However, about a third of our employers told us that they had told candidates not to use AI. So a very clear statement in the negative for AI use to candidates by a third of our employers, while still the sentiment of the majority being pretty open to being able to use it in the relevant places. And what are recruiters doing in terms of using AI in the recruitment processes? Now, this one was a bit of a surprise to us because, as any of you that were on the call and event last year will know, we saw that the number of people using AI in their recruitment process was going up and up and up quite significantly. It tripled between 2022 and 2023, but it's actually decreased this year. Less employers told us this year that they were using AI, and in fact, nearly 80% told us that they don't use AI in their recruitment processes. Underpinning that, we heard again that the rationale for not using AI, or the disadvantages seen with using AI, was all about that lack of human centricity, the lack of the human engagement within the recruitment process. It will be really interesting to see how this trend starts to stabilize or not in the coming year. And I very much think this is one to watch, as it is with the applications and the use by candidates. So let's now look at what you told us about the future. So in terms of the future, we asked some slightly different questions when we asked you to predict what was going to influence your early careers recruitment activities in the coming 12 or more months. ESG, environmental, social and governance issues, really high up on the list in terms of having a positive impact on how you recruit, what you recruit. And again, themes like skills-based recruitment, very much still very strongly within the horizon of the future to be moving towards and away from competency and experience-led activities around recruitment. AI, obviously, this is one to watch, because actually our forecast, your crystal ball gazing told us that actually there was more positive ideas about integrating AI into your recruitment processes than maybe the actual reality of that, as we have seen this year, being the case. And again, we see some positive trends in terms of the context in which you may increase your levels of recruitment or decrease. So again, thinking about that point about ESG, things like climate change and net zero having a positive impact on the numbers of early careers talents you might recruit. But no surprises that AI, automation, technology advancements are one of the key areas you see driving the need to recruit more student talent. And what was interesting this year is that for the first time, we saw that changes in workforce demographics could also be a key positive driver for recruiting early careers talent. And again, that's something that we really want to keep a watch on, as we know from information that Stephen and others have shared, that the workforce demographics are actually changing in a less strong way towards early careers talent in the coming years. And so it'll be interesting to see how this rebalances again as those demographics start to move forward. So I'm going to start to wrap up now on what is a very detailed report. I thoroughly suggest that you take time to jump into the details that are relevant for your organisations, for your students, and also to please do attend things like our sector forums or indeed the EDI conference if you're curious to know more in a particular area of detail. But to summarise for now, the student employment marketplace is slowing. It is looking to stagnate in the next 12 or so months, but there are some positive shoots of activity, including the school and college leaver area. And in fact, we're going to be moving forwards as the ISC to look more into school and college leaver activities and work experiences in the coming 12 months. So that's definitely something that we're curious to know more about and to support our members with more. Application volumes, particularly for graduates, are skyrocketing. I think I've put increasing significantly year on year. I think this year we could call it skyrocketing. And this is a challenge for employers. It's a challenge for employers to manage the volumes, particularly in the context of limited budgets, possibly reductions in resources, and the requirement to do more with less. Another thing to take away, regardless of which sector you're in, is that the student hiring is a very valuable route to bridging skills gaps. And we've seen earlier in today's presentation that digital, AI, IT skills, engineering, finance and accounting, these three skill sets are absolutely transcending sector, and it is absolutely an area where our student recruiters are focusing on bringing in that talent with that potential to bridge these gaps and develop those skills within the organisations. And of course, another great way to develop these skills and help young people understand their career choices, their opportunities when they finish their academic studies, work experiences, and then developing those skills through apprenticeships. And we again see that these are really strong trends that are not stagnating when it comes to the overall landscape, albeit they are proportionally less than the graduate marketplace. So I am going to move to Q&A. And Stephen, I can see you're back. Thank you.
Never went away, George. It just turned my camera off.
I know.
That was great. Thank you very much. Obviously George has summarised a lot of quite in-depth analysis that's in the survey. Is it online now, George? I should know this, but we always try and get up online today, don't we?
It should be. There's a QR code at the end, which will show everyone. It should be up there now. And if it isn't, it will be really soon.
Excellent. So there's a lot more detail in there, of course, 70 or 80 pages of detail. So, and a lot of the data that George has shown, actually, there's a lot more analysis and it's particularly sector by sector analysis under there, because that was one of the questions. So I've got the Q&A up. So if anybody's got any questions, pop them into there. I'm going to go through those now. One of the straightforward ones, because I know the answer to this, but I'll let you answer it, George, is about breakdown of salary by sector.
Yes, so we have that in the wider report, and it's broken down by sector, and it's also broken down by type of hire, so graduate, school and college leaver, interns, etc.
Right. And also the data dashboards, they're going to be done as well, aren't they? So
yes. Yes, that is a really good point, Stephen. I don't know how many people on the call know about this, but we last year put in a number of data dashboards that are available to members on the website. And that's a really great place to go and look outside of the report to get benchmark data. And actually, there's a regional one as well. So you can toggle around in terms of regional view, not just the averages by sector or the averages by type of recruit.
Okay, right. That's plugs for the ISE data over with for now. We will come back to those with the QR code at the end. Let's just go into some of the other questions that we've got here. So, top of the list, somebody's commented on the 1 in 10 employees focusing on low socioeconomic backgrounds and asking that, given the noise of this, they thought that would be higher. And are there any qualitative insights to suggest that there is intersectional focus, as in looking at other characteristics such as gender or heritage, etc. We've got different stats, haven't we, on this, on the number of doing it? Is it worth unpicking those a little bit first?
Yeah, so what I showed just now is about the targets. So absolutely fair comment. Surprising, given the focus that social mobility was not as high up in terms of the number of employers who had targets. What we don't ask about is intersectionality, but I do know that a number of employers have started to have a bit more of a balanced scorecard, shall we say, approach when it comes to their targets versus what they achieve and whether they deem that successful or not. So it may be that there are dials that are being utilised to give a level of flexibility to talk to the point about intersectionality. What in the report you'll see is that actually we also ask, well, how successful are you being in these ones? And actually, our employers told us they are being more successful in areas such as social mobility than they are actually proportionally in other factors such as gender. So while the target may be aspirational, the results are very mixed.
And also, we have previously asked, haven't we, questions around, there's a difference between targets and are you focused on this area?
Yes.
How important is it to you?
Yes.
Because there's definitely a live debate amongst employers about whether their targets might even be the right thing. And if I remember, when we asked about where's social mobility in terms of your list of priorities, comes in third and is over half of our members are actually doing stuff on social mobility,
Yes.
even if they don't have a target. Is that right?
Yes, it is. And also in the report, you can see some details about what types of activities and interventions are being undertaken and where in the process. So we asked questions about not just where it is in terms of importance, not just targets, but we also asked, where are you making changes to support candidates coming in and through the process? So there's some quite interesting data in detail about how effective some of those interventions are being.
Cool, thanks. Right, moving on to the next question. So this is a question about the data we have on the effectiveness of various selection and assessment tools. Can you just give people an idea of how that's actually calculated and where it comes from? And the second follow-up question is around, is it based on employer opinion?
In terms of employer opinion on the effectiveness, yes, that will be a qualitative answer, i.e., we have asked the organisation, how effective do you think these assessments are? But the quantitative side is in terms of what they are using and at what stage in the process. The effectiveness is still probably more on that qualitative side of what they experience or what they believe to be the most effective tools.
Got it. So let me get that right. So the data we have on what you're using is quantitative, basically. People say, here's what we use where in the process. And I might come back to that when I do a wrap up, because there's something around technology being used earlier. But I guess actually also, although it is subjective in a sense, it's employers telling their opinion, we know that most of the employers we work with actually analyze the data quite closely to see what works. So their opinion is probably formed by all the analysis they're doing on the back end, rather than just going, oh yeah, I think interviews work a bit better than X.
Yes, absolutely. I guess what I meant by qualitative is that we're not asking them to give us their success rates or their ratios of conversions from one stage to the next and tying that to the type of assessment that's being undertaken. But you're absolutely right, Stephen. We know the majority of our employers look at this very closely to make sure they're using the right tools at the right point in their recruitment processes. And of course, if something isn't being effective, they will know about that. So yes, it's not purely finger in the air, I think, type of response at all. No. And sorry if that came across like it sounded like that's what I thought.
Not at all. Not at all. Right. So the next question I have up is around some of the AI information that you were talking about. So somebody's asked a question, which is, what about the other 25% when it comes to AI? So I suppose that's 25% that are using it. And I had a question of this actually at the time, I thought as well. Is there still a little bit of uncertainty around what AI is? Because there's this whole idea of tech and using algorithms and data to make decisions. AI is different, because AI implies to me you've got variables, as in the systems are learning as they go and therefore changing their parameters, which I would have thought isn't happening that much, because that would make me feel a bit uneasy that actually you're not equally being consistent. So do you mind unpacking all that a little bit? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think, to take a step back, I think up until 18 months, 2 years ago, probably there were technologies that people were deploying that they weren't entirely sure what was sitting behind it, and they didn't really need to know what was sitting behind it because they knew it was working. I think, although I still think potentially there are technologies being deployed where it's unclear to the employer exactly what is happening behind the scenes, I do think that with the new EU regulations around this and recruitment being deemed high risk for usage of AI in Europe, I think that people have to get really clear on what is the technology that they're using and is it classified as AI. I think that conversation is going to continue to evolve, however, because obviously, as the suite of technologies that use and coexist with AI continues to evolve and adapt and grow as the wonderful pace of transformation of AI continues, I think it's going to be a landscape which everyone is trying to keep pace with. And it's going to be really down to your partnerships with those providers of those solutions to really understand what is being used underneath the skin of the assessment, and where is AI potentially within that mix.
And I'm sure that's a subject we're going to come back to more and more,
Absolutely.
Walter, from the student perspective. A question here. I mentioned this at the start. You mentioned it as well. I'm going to come back to it. So just before we close off as well, this the number of applications per vacancy. Can you just unpick some of the numbers you quoted? Because I know we talk about graduates and also school and college leavers. And somebody's done a quick calculation: 1.2 million applications for 17,000 roles. I'm trusting their maths. I haven't got my calculator right. Was 70 to 1. Is that because at some point you talked about the total number of applications employers have received for all vacancies?
No, the ratio is 140 to 1 on 1.2 million applications for 17,000 vacancies.
Yeah, I get that right. Well, I get 16.8, but I've done it very rounded down.
Because we've also rounded 1.2 million and 17,000, but it is. No, I double checked that too because I was absolutely astonished. So I did double check that several times. But no, in what I did mention at the very beginning was that the report talks to over 40,000 student recruits. So 40,000 was the overall number of students being recruited. 17,000 of that 40,000 was just graduates, which again is why around 42% of the overall hiring of students is graduate.
And I guess it's worth stressing as well, it's the ratio that's really important.
Yes.
The hard number of vacancies, because we don't have exactly the same sample every year, because not every employer completes the survey every single year.
Although it'd be great if they did.
It would be great if they did, and that is another plug.
Plug for next year.
When the survey comes around, your data that makes it accurate. So the number of total vacancies might vary. It's the ratio that's really important, because that's the bits that we focus on.
Exactly, because I first thought, wow, 1.2 million graduate applications, that has to be the highest we've ever seen. And actually it wasn't. It was higher, marginally higher, proportionally higher in 2021. But as you say, Stephen, the vacancy numbers being lower and that application number being so high means that the ratio of applications to vacancies is significantly higher than we've ever seen. And by sector, no spoilers for the sector forums, but by sector that looks different again. And anyone on the call who comes from the finance and professional services sectors will be unsurprised to hear that your ratio for graduates is way over 140 to 1, which is a struggle and a challenge, when last year it was 120 to 1 for that sector, and now it's north of 160 to 1.
Which is another plug, both for the detail in the report, but also the dashboards, because the dashboards allow you to vary by sector, so you can look at stats like that, because it does vary. And of course, also it varies by employer size. So if you're an employer that's got 100 vacancies, that's a different situation to if you're an employer that's got 1,000 plus vacancies. So there's all those variables in the data. Next question. I'm conscious of time, so next question from Laura. Could you give some more details about how and why ESG issues will be increasingly important in recruitment over the next year? That's probably more if you picked up anything anecdotal. Any thoughts on that?
Thank you. I mean, the reason, and thank you, Laura, for the question. The reason we asked about ESG in this year's report, which we haven't done before, was because we were listening in to our employer members, talking about the increased topic within their own organisations around ESG and how that was or wasn't starting to manifest in what they were recruiting. But we wanted to kind of understand it from both of those dimensions. The first dimension being the classic, is it going to mean more or less opportunities for students. But the second one, in terms of, does it mean that it's going to impact the way that you recruit or what you do in your recruitment activities? So a classic conversation of a few years ago was everyone was saying, well, if you go on campus, are you taking loads of plastic stuff, which students are rebelling against because it's not ecologically friendly, etc. So that kind of ripple effect has now really started to manifest itself. And of course, ESG can also include EDI. So let's have another 3-letter acronym in there. But it actually is starting to become a wider banner within organizations to include factors that we've already looked at in silos over the last few years. But it feels like it's becoming more harmonized as an impact for the employer and for the opportunities for those joining. And I think what's also interesting is that in certain sectors, there is regulation as well, which again could create more job opportunities in that space, but also has an impact on how they do business.
Great, thank you. And again, I think that's a subject that we're definitely going to return to, because it's, the survey shows, it's going to increase in importance. And so I'm still going through the questions. Helen has put a post up there. It's not really a question, is it, Helen? We're going to refer to it anyway, because it's a plug for the dashboards yet again. Helen says they're amazing for drilling down into sectors. Super. I mean, that is why we introduced them, because actually people said, God, how can I get variable data? How can I compare? So that is what they're there for. Development surveys in there as well, it's worth mentioning. It's not just recruitment. Joan, our chair, is obviously listening, which is great to see. Hi, Joan. So Joan's asked a question. What was the thing that surprised you most in the report this year? That's putting you on the spot.
Am I allowed to say 2 things?
Of course you can. It's your survey, you're allowed to.
Our survey, collectively, our survey, including those on the line who contributed. Thank you again for all of that. I would say I was blown away by the jump in the volumes of applications compared to the relative stagnation of the recruitment volumes. I think the second thing that I wasn't expecting, and I think this time last year I actually said, we're going to see this increase again next year, was the use of AI by recruiters. I honestly thought that we would not be talking today about a decline in the use of recruitment AI. So I think they're my 2 standout ones, but there's so much in there, and it's really interesting, particularly if you can get into the sector view or a particular slice of the action. I was also really delighted to see school and college leaver holding tight and actually doing really well in terms of things like work experiences. I think that's a real testament to our members that they're investing in that level, which is traditionally a lot harder to engage in than the graduate market space. So yeah.
And the one that I agree with those, they caught my eye as well, but also was salaries, because of all the conversations in our member forums over the last 2 years around pressure on salaries, cost of living. Actually, I think it shows how tight the economy is and how tight employers' budgets are when it comes to salary increases, that actually, although they've gone up, they've not kept pace with inflation. And I thought they would go up a little bit more. So I think there's more we can unpack in that as well.
And I think that's a really interesting point, Stephen, especially when you link to the development survey findings, which is that traditionally we would have said, reasons for graduates leaving employers after their programs or during their programs even was about lack of career opportunities, purpose in their work, more qualitative measures. This year, over half of employers told us that they were losing their talent because of salary. So I think those 2 points combined are quite impactful, and employers really do need to start paying attention to it.
Right. A question on video interviews, actually. Somebody has asked about being video interviews weren't on the assessment type table. I can't remember why we did that. Is that because it gets a little bit difficult to blur between what's a first interview and what's a video interview? Because funny enough, when I read it, I just assumed that first interviews in the main now were video interviews. Any thoughts on that? So is that something we need to go back to maybe the next survey?
I think it would be interesting to go back to that in the next survey to demark between the two. We did move to one category of just interviews, to try and simplify the trend data that we were getting, because it can be quite fractious to try and see the trend within the data if it's too fractious. But I do think it's a good point. And again, linking to the use of AI and other aspects of the conversations we've had today, it will be interesting to maybe dig a little bit deeper in terms of in what format some of these assessments are being delivered, where it could be either or. Yeah, I think we could definitely do that next year.
Cool. Thank you. There's one last question, but I'm going to answer that one because it directly almost could have been scripted, and I promise you it's not.
Wonderful.
Because it's about applications, and there's just some final thoughts that I want to share just before we round off. So do you mind just, yes, thanks. George is controlling the slide. So I just want to go back to this growth in graduate applications per vacancy, and that's been the piece that has been picked out quite significantly in the press work that we've done today. So that's what they were talking about on the Today programme this morning. The FT's run with this and a whole bunch of other outlets. And it is that ratio. So the actual question that was asked was, do we have any insights into why the number of applications from graduates are skyrocketing? And that's difficult to assess because we don't talk to students. You know, it's lots of our members who do student surveys and analysis. That's not what we do. So this is what employers are experiencing. But in our view, there's two reasons that are driving that. One is the tight labour market. So it's good that actually graduate vacancies and school and college leaver vacancies aren't decreasing. They're still on the up, but they're not increasing by much. And as you then that reflects, I think, the lack of growth in the economy. And also when you look at the broader market data and the number of actual jobs posting for graduate stroke students, actually those seem to be down. So it sounds like the sort of more ad hoc vacancies, the SME market, which we don't report on, might also be suffering as well. So that is probably putting pressure on students to apply for more jobs. But the other piece is this is both AI that we've talked about and technology, making it more straightforward for candidates to apply. Although there's still an argument that actually it's quite a lengthy process that people have to go through. But the other bit is this piece around actually the minimum application criteria. And you can see that particularly around A level. So if you go back 10 years, nearly 40% of employers were using A levels as a cutoff criteria. So that was basically, you know, if you haven't got X A levels, let's say, for example, an A and two Bs, you can't apply for this role. You would have been screened out. The same is true of the 2-1. I think the 2-1 stuck around, although it has decreased as well, but so many students get a 2-1, it's around 80%. That's probably less of a screening out criteria. But you look at those figures now, I think the 9%, 13% is kind of, it varies a bit. Again, the sample size changes, but fundamentally it's reduced so significantly, employers using that cutoff point. And that's where tech comes in. You know, all the great advances that have been made in assessment technology and being able to do that up front as part of the process means employers have much better data in terms of making those selection decisions. But of course, that means that more and more, and here we go, this is the data again from Georgia, you look at actually around those when psychometric tests and those kind of tools, when they're being used in the initial stage of applications. It used to be that, you know, you did your application form and the first stage was an interview. Whereas actually you look at this now and you look at interviews being used in the first stage, that's only 21% of employers are using interviews in the first stage after an application stage. So that is a big difference for students and for employers. So it means that actually students can make many more applications. So students that may have been put off from applying to certain roles are applying. And I think that's a good thing. I think as an industry, we should celebrate that because actually that shows greater diversity of opportunity. Employers are approaching a much broader range of candidates. But there is a downside, and I don't think we're talking enough yet about that downside, because if you think about student experience, actually receiving so many rejections, actually what does that do? For mental health, as well as just understanding the jobs market, you get 2 or 3 rejections and you may well feel that, you know, that means I'm just not right for the sector, when actually they could be. They just need to keep developing through. And also I think it has implications for diversity. If you haven't got a peer support group around you that says, you know, This is how the student labour market works. This is how actually you apply for jobs. This is how you need to build your skills. This is how you need to do your applications. Again, I think that might distort the market. So I'm not saying we have the answers. I've not been saying that when we've done some of our broadcast work today and some stuff we put out on LinkedIn. But I do think as a sector, it's something that we need to look at, because if we think about the broader issues of the candidate experience, that's definitely something that we need to think about. So we will be coming back to that in the future, and we'd welcome lots of input conversations on that. And then just a final point around actually where we said those resources were. So there's a QR copy. Click onto that. It's in the member section of the website. That will take you direct to the report. You can also get previous year's report. You can also get the development survey report. So that's where all our data and information is held. So please do go into that report. In an hour-long webinar, there's only, a very limited amount of what we can cover. The detail is really in that report. And we just hear time and time again members saying who they use this data both to make decisions on how they manage their functions, but also to articulate internally to all stakeholders around what's happening in the student market, and helping those stakeholders get behind the headlines that they might read in the press. Very useful information. So we do encourage you to use that. George mentioned the online sector forums. So George will be doing deep dives on this data by sector. So for employer sector forums, if you join those sector forums, Georgia will go through the headlines, of course, but also actually some specific sector by sector data, because it does vary significantly, some of these measures by data. We are always conscious in an event like this that we are generalizing to a certain extent. And of course, all the other ISE business continues as well. So we've got the EDI conference coming up soon. That's live in person at the Park Plaza, Victoria, London, 6th of November. Get your tickets for that. There are still some tickets available. Our HE conference aimed at careers professionals, that is running 3rd to 5th of December. We're doing that online this year. We flipped that 1 year face-to-face, 1 year online. So please do register for that as well. And then 2025 will be on us before we know it. Apprenticeships Conference, Student Development Conference, and even next summer, the Student Recruitment Conference. We've got that date in the diary already. So please look out for those coming online and being able to book them. But also there's events very much coming this year. Please do join those where you can. Thanks from me, from Georgia. I mean, the work that goes behind the scenes on this, from both yourself and from the research team in the research unit at Derby University that we use, I mean, it's quite considerable. For the last month or two, the amount of backwards and forwards you can imagine that go into a report of this size is quite phenomenal. So a big thank you from me, and I'm saying that on behalf of all our members as well, so I'm sure they'd like to say the same thing. Anything that you'd like to finish with Georgia before we say goodbye to everyone?
Very quickly, because I am conscious we're over time and I can see the numbers of participants dropping, but just to say thank you to everyone who did contribute to this year's survey, because we really can't do this without you. We need to know what you are experiencing to be able to do these kinds of reports. So thank you to everyone who did contribute, and please do contribute the next opportunity you have if you didn't, or if you did, and please do reach out if you want to talk about anything that you've seen today. We've got the sector forums, we've got conferences, we've got lots of other opportunities, the WhatsApp groups. Let's keep the conversation alive, because as Stephen says, there's quite a lot of things here that we see as trends, but we don't understand necessarily the details. So we'd love to hear that and get into the conversations. Yeah, definitely. Because there's a lot of detail, and there's lots of conversations to have behind the data that really brings this to life and helps help explain some of what's going on. So thank you, Georgia. Thank you, team. Thank you everybody for paying for dialing into this webinar. We will send the slides around, and also the recording will be published as well. So if you want to catch up on anything, you can do that as well. But also if you want to share it with your team, please go ahead and do that. We want to share this knowledge as much as possible. So wherever you are in the world, if it's the UK, please enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Bye.